Hello, and welcome to a new series of interviews and podcasts here by me, Dinis Guarda, and within the context of citiesabc.com. We're here to talk about ideas and the biggest problems and solutions as well that humanity is facing, and at the moment we have a lot. But as well looking at ways how we can make the world a better place. Today we're going to be talking about education, about India, and about as well universities and business schools. And I think this is particularly important in the context of our platform that is about cities, about citizens, and about the future and the present. This podcast and video is powered by citiesabc.com, a platform that I created. That is a smart cities platform and wiki technology, digital transformation for cities, for universities, and for citizens. Today, we are here with Dr. Tanuj Nandan, that is a professor and former head of the School of Management Studies, Motilal Nehru National Institute of Technology, Allahabad. I think I spelled it wrong. But as well, an expert in financial management, and as well with a background in statistics. So welcome to our series, first of all, Dr. Tanuj.
Well, thank you so much, Dinis. It is wonderful being on the show. I was actually looking forward to this, and it's a great feeling being here with you.
Thank you. So I'm looking forward as well. So I love India, and I think I'm particularly interested in talking about education, financial, economics, and as well the progress that India has been making, but as well about education and the future and the present. So you have a master and a PhD and a background in your master and PhD is specialization in financial management, and you have been involved as well in national and international conferences and seminars, and you do a lot of research, articles and papers to journals of reputation, especially in the areas of finance and economics. And as well, you've been as well part of the administrative positions in the university as well, and working with public and media relations and multiple associations. And you've been as well associate dean. So you have a lot of experience in terms of education, both on the research side, but as well on the academic as well management side. And as well, of course, you've been having a big international relationship between India and the world. So I would like to start as the first question, and I always try to take that, and I think specifically in the case of India, I'm very interested on that, is if you could give us your background. And I think your background in terms of both education, which I think is key for this interview, but as well, how do you see your background from the perspective of growing in India when India was a much more underdeveloped country, to the point right now that is becoming one of the leading powerhouses in the world, both in technology, economics, and in the future is going to be the second economy in the world by 2050, according to most of the studies. So a bit of context about you, that would be great for our audience and for everyone that's listening to us.
Right. So, Dinis, I've always had a passion for numbers. And so I went on to graduate in statistics. And then I did always know that statistics was my area. But when I went on later on to do a master's in finance, and then later on a PhD in finance, and then I realized that finance in itself is highly quantitative in nature. So then I was able to draw the links between my background in statistics and what I need to do in finance. So I graduated with a master's in business administration way back in 1995. And I was very fortunate, because there was this university which after a long gap was hiring for full-time faculty positions, and I applied and I managed to make it through. And I think it took me a couple of days to realize that teaching and research was really my thing. So, they say that if you choose a profession that you love, you never really work a day in your life. So I was fortunate in that sense. I love the teaching profession. And then when I went into teaching, I also realized that when you're studying, you attain mastery in a subject, but then when you begin to teach it, you really go into the depths of it. So I explored finance quite deeply, and whatever I taught. So at that university, which was in Madhya Pradesh, one of the states in India, I spent almost 10 years. And then I moved to my current organization, which is this Motilal Nehru National Institute of Technology. It's by Indian standards, it is an old institute. We have completed 60 years. I know for those of you who are sitting in the UK, you have institutions which are 800 years old. So 60 years is hardly anything, but it is an institute with a great deal of history and good standing. I've spent about 14 years here now, into my 15th year now. And I work in the area primarily of risk management. So risk from a financial standpoint, investment markets, and specifically derivatives markets. So that is a really interesting area which has developed in probably the past 15 or 20 years or so in India. It has been there in the world, but it's still in the growth phase, majorly in the growth phase. And maybe I could share some statistics with you about the way this area has been growing. So currently my responsibility primarily is in the School of Management. I'm a professor. So we have a management program, the MBA program. We also have a good number of Ph.D. students. And being part of an institution of technology, we also offer courses to some of the B.Tech students. So students who are graduating with a bachelor's in technology. So I, for example, offer a course in international finance to the final year students. And there I find that actually there's an excellent marriage between a background in technology and this world of finance and economics, because those students who have a background in engineering, they tend to understand numbers very well. And as I mentioned, that finance is getting more and more quantitative. So many of them then they think of it as a career choice, and they in fact they change their career path from hardcore engineering, and many of them in fact wind up in this fintech sector that we've been talking about. I would also like to mention that I am faculty in charge in the Office of Training and Placements at this institute here. And this Office of Training and Placements, it looks after all the final placements of all the students we have in the final years, as well as all the internships, so inbound and outbound internships. So it's actually immensely demanding, but probably even more immensely rewarding for me, because you see your students getting placed in some of the best organizations in the world. And more than that, I get to interact with the representatives of various companies that come down for placements. So when I do interact with them, sometimes I'm also required, in fact, quite frequently, I'm required to travel to the company end. They want me there at their company because they want me to know what they're doing, so that I can bring that knowledge back with me and help it translate it to, let's say, the way we teach our students. So being a person of management, business management, that insight that I gain into the way a various number of industries function. It could be petrochemicals, it could be automobile, it could be software, it could be banking. So I get to look at those companies from a close perspective. That actually helps me a lot. So that's largely what I do.
Particularly interested, going back to your education, and I think I have a lot of friends and acquaintances from India, and India is still going through a massive transformation, and is a transformation almost. So I think when we speak about India, we look at thousands of years instead of looking at 2,000 years like we have in Europe or in the United States 200 years. So we have different kind of perception of time, and as well of culture, religions, the multiple languages that you have and dialects. I would like to get a bit of that background from you, because I think the devil's on details, and I think especially when it comes to I have a deeply respect with anyone in India, because you speak at least normally 3 to 5 languages, sometimes more, and you have as well a huge contextualized from the challenge of a country under development, but as well a country with so much cultural and social nuances, which are not easy for foreigner or even for other cultures to understand. So if you could get us that background, I think it's important to understand that coming from that multicultural pot that is not easy to understand for someone that is abroad and for someone that looks at India.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, because we grow up in that perspective, we are able to understand it slightly better. But let me just explain it to you in this way. Maybe, there are 8 of us traveling in a train compartment, 8 Indians sitting together. And it's also possible that none of us speak the same language. So we could be from different regions because we have so many languages. Sometimes I show my friends, currency notes from India, because on that currency note, you have the denomination printed in 15 different languages. And that's not an exhaustive list of the languages that are official in India, because we have a large number of official languages. And then we have so many dialects, so many cultures. But that's typical of India. We are a melting pot. And for that reason, from a cultural perspective, I think we tend to be more tolerant, far more tolerant, in fact, than many other people. So we tend to be, by and large, less, let's say, racially oriented. Um, and and it gives you, like you said, exposure to different languages, different cultures, microcultures. So that's actually very useful for us. And since you mentioned it, I was reminded of this Chinese philosopher, maybe about 100 years back. His name, I think, was Hu Shi. He said that India um, dominated Chinese culture for 20 centuries and never even had to send one soldier across the border. So that actually brings out the crux of Indian thinking. In our history, probably if you go through Indian history, you will find that we have never been expansionist, in the sense that we've never tried to conquer other people's territory. So we are happy with what we have. We try to find space within what we have, and then we try to grow there. So that is one aspect. Also, you mentioned that, yes, India is poised for a major takeoff. Actually, we've been making changes to the way we do things for a long period of time now. Probably before we gained independence, but specifically after we gained independence, we've done a lot. But over the last maybe 15 years or so, those efforts have gained, let's say, a critical mass. So they have begun to make a major impact now. So if you look at things like infrastructure, perhaps, we have much better infrastructure in terms of telecommunication, in terms of roadways, in terms of railways. We have the largest roadways network in the world, and probably the second largest railway network in the world. We also are working on inland waterway development. You know that in terms of energy, particularly power, because one of the things where we are aspiring to come up, if we need to come up to that level of a developed nation, would be to enhance our manufacturing capabilities. And when you want to enhance manufacturing capabilities, probably the biggest hurdle so far has been availability of power, energy, that is. So over the past few years, the work that we have been doing over all of these years has actually tended to bear fruit. So you will find that there's a lot of energy now that we are able to generate. And in fact, we are able to meet our needs. In some of the areas, we actually have a power surplus. And because of the presence of the grid transmission system, we are able to move power around quite well. And in fact, that goes into my domain as well, because there's a lot of power trading that is going on. Also, in terms of renewable energy, new and renewable energy, for example, you have solar power and you have wind power. So in India, we don't have a very large amount of wind intensity all over. There are some areas which have good wind intensity, so they are generating wind energy. But the plains of India, most of India is plains, and it's a huge country. So the plains of India have sufficient solar intensity. So you would be surprised, maybe if I would just recommend or suggest that the viewers who are interested could go on to the website of one of our ministries. It's the Ministry for New and Renewable Energies. So this ministry has set very ambitious targets, but more importantly, we have achieved a good number of those targets in renewable energy. So that's clean energy. So when you talk about most of the things that you need for setting up stepping up our manufacturing levels, we actually have done quite well. And you know that we are endowed well with intellectual capital. So it is people from Indian educational institutions like the IITs or even the NITs that go out of India, and then they work, and then they do really well. So globally, they are doing well in so many corporations. So we have that intellectual capital which is available to us. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and maybe we'll take that up later, like you mentioned, in this discussion. So I would say that if you talk to people today, it would be very easy to paint a gloomy picture. But as you said at the beginning of this interview, let's look at the positives. And I always tend to look at the positives. There are really a large number of positives for India right now. And being a person of finance, my tendency is to look at the fundamentals. And if you look at the fundamentals of what we have right now, the fundamentals look very promising.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. So I would like to touch that, especially in your work in research and in terms of the, like you said, there's a lot of, I think, a lot of prejudice and a lot of myths worldwide, especially because we have a challenge in terms of data and as well perception of even in measured kind of considered more advanced countries, we have a lot of challenges. If you look, for instance, the United States is presently with over 40 million people unemployed. There's a lot of challenges in different ways. The UK is facing as well. So at the moment, we cannot really talk about countries like first, second velocity, because every country's challenges and some of them are really very big. So coming back before you go to the cultural numbers, so from still the education and the background. So I'm particularly interested on this because I think it's one of the things I find very difficult for me to work with Indian different cultures, but as well to understand internationally. Because if when you look internationally from India, the news might touch one area or two, but it's very difficult to go and grasp the reality. So let's say you've been an associate dean, you've been as well in various positions of management in the university. So how do you see, first, let's start with education and special universities. Like you said, most of the universities are quite recent after the independence of India, but there's already a huge cutting edge research coming out of that. There's a lot of concepts around frugal innovation, data, and as well a lot of fintech right now developments over there. But as well, there's a huge, like you said, amount of human capital, because India is a very cultural ecosystem and almost a continent in itself. If you get us a bit of overview about the education, the universities and business schools in India, just the context of how do you see the industry right now?
Right. Our school education has always been quite good. So primary education, secondary education, higher secondary. If you compare a student from India, let's say at higher secondary level, he would probably do better than his peers on the average. So he's better than the average. It's coming into the college levels that we tend to fall out, except for the very good institutions. Probably the level of education needs to be improved, but there's always room for improvement, and we are working on that. So we have different tiers. So students who come out from institutions which are top-notch institutions actually get the best of education. We are working on improving the level of education in our other universities, those universities and those colleges which actually deal with the masses. And there's a huge scope for improvement there. For example, I get a better perspective of it because I deal with the industries. So I know even from an engineering standpoint, there's these statistics that come out, that the number of graduates that we are producing, let's say in technology, not all of them can be employed by the industry as such because they need to be retrained. And industries are open to training them again. But there is some sort of a disconnect between what we are teaching them and what the industry needs them to know. So that kind of a gap needs to be worked upon. We are working on it, but there, as of now, I will have to acknowledge that there is a difference between what the industry needs and what we are producing. And that is why you said that, like you mentioned, that there's a huge amount of capital, intellectual capital or human capital, which is available. But we need to leverage it better to get the kind of dividend that we can get from it.
Yeah, that is an important part here that I want to touch. So that is, I think, the biggest challenge that we're facing nowadays, and you touched the point, is that most of first of all, the concept of knowledge and training is changing so fast, especially as we interact more and more with machines, especially into artificial intelligence and technology-driven society and automation. The teachings we have in universities are becoming increasingly more complex and more difficult. And especially, I think, in a country like India, that has all this concept of history that is much enlarged and bigger, but at the same time that has development very fast growing. it's more difficult probably, but as well more rewarding because you have massive economy and you have different things. So this relationship between the teaching of things in the present and then the relationship with the industry is critical for universities and special business schools. So how are you tackling that in the case of your business school and your university?
Uh, for us, it's a little easier because we have a large amount of academic autonomy, and we also have a large amount of interaction with the industry. So we are able to do it, although I would confess that we are not doing it probably to the extent that we should. But still, because of the kind of autonomy we have, the moment we know that there's a kind of a skill set which is required, we are able to translate that into our syllabus. So all of these areas which are coming up, particularly, you know that in India, the software and the service sector is quite huge. So the kind of skills that are being required in that sector, we are able to translate those. When it comes to the core branches like mechanical engineering and civil engineering, there, because it takes a little more time to translate, you need to upgrade your workshops and your laboratories. It takes a little more time, but we are slightly, I would say we are privileged in an institution like this because we are funded fully by the government of India and we have total academic autonomy. So we are able to translate the requirements of the industry much faster than many other institutes would. And the silver lining here is that even for many other institutions, like we have a large number of private universities that have come up, they also enjoy a large amount of academic autonomy, which means they are free to decide on their own syllabuses. And for that reason, they are also coming up quite well. So some of the private universities are doing well in this area. The rest might probably take some time to catch up.
So coming back right now to the specific areas of, so in your areas of research, could you tell us a bit what are the areas that you've been researching and some of the been publishing?
Yes. So I actually, you can see a smile comes to my face when I talk about my area of research. But it is interesting because I work in the area of risk management and in the area of financial derivatives. And that's a really interesting area because we have these stock exchanges, particularly. I was going through a report which is brought out by one of the industry associations globally. And it says that over the past 10 years, there has been a marked shift in derivatives trading, primarily from the developed countries to the BRICS nations. And just to put it in perspective, we have an exchange in India called the National Stock Exchange of India. And this National Stock Exchange of India is not of very old vintage, but in terms of derivatives trading, it is today the largest in terms of volume, and it has gone past many very large exchanges. So we have a large amount of derivatives trading that is going on, and at the same time, some of the contracts, for example, right now, the contract which is the most popular contract in India, in the world, is our Bank Nifty, which is an Indian index on which traders set up their contracts. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is where it applies to the Indian economy most is that India, you would probably be aware, is still largely in terms of employment, it is an agrarian economy. More than 60% of the population of India still depends upon agriculture, either directly or indirectly, for the livelihood. So although agriculture is not, in terms of, let's say, percentages, it is not a very significant percentage of our GDP. It is like 16 to 17%. But that 16 to 17% is highly significant because it gives employment to almost 2/3 of our people. Now, the link with the derivatives market is that the farmer in India, like the farmer all over the world, faces primarily a price risk, which means he doesn't know in advance the kind of price that he's going to get for his produce, and which means that most of the time he ends up getting a poor deal. Now, we have these commodities exchanges which have come up in a big way globally and also in India. And these commodities exchanges provide a broad base because now you have more than one market where the price is being determined. So one market where the price is being determined is your traditional market where the farmer goes to sell his produce. But now he also has the option of checking the prices on the commodities exchange, and if required, through a mechanism of aggregation, he can trade on the commodities exchange. And there's been a lot of argument about how that contributes to the volatility. But in my opinion, the existence of commodities exchange actually helps farmers tremendously. So, particularly in the case of India, my area of research, which is derivatives, that is coming to the help of farmers by providing them an alternate market. Interestingly, I also research on a completely different topic. So one side is the investment markets, but I also have an interest on how the poor people of India, how they invest. So I have, for example, I just did a project on the savings and investment patterns of the urban poor in India. And you would probably be surprised to know that although they are classified as poor people, but poor people also tend to save and they tend to invest. And there are various studies which are done on investment patterns of poor people, but those studies have been focused mainly on those who live in rural areas, not in the city areas. So I did this research and I came across some very interesting conclusions. But to put it in a nutshell, the interesting finding is that my research also supports the opinion that yes, people who are poor, although they are poor, they do have some money and they do save it and they do invest it. The important thing is that we need to come up with models that will help them invest in ways which maybe don't yield a very high return, but they don't carry a very high risk. So, making them aware of these investment options and then delivering a model or delivering a mechanism by which they can invest, that becomes important in the context of India. So, as part of this research, which is also available on the internet, we have suggested some mechanisms, and that mechanism is really, it cannot be taken to be unique. So if you're talking about some parts of Africa, maybe the mechanism that we have to suggest would be different. But even in various parts of India, the mechanism would have to be different. But this model talks about how we can come up with mechanisms which will allow poor people also to invest so that their money remains safe and they get some value for it.
That's very interesting. And so one of the, I saw in terms of the papers that you built, that you wrote, and it's part of your Google Scholar as well. So one of the things that you have done so far is really researching a lot of different areas. And there's one of the things that you have, for instance, is internet banking in India. There was as well for 2008, at least the research, but I'm sure that you have updated. So could you give us a bit of an overview? Because I know that India has been having huge innovation in terms of internet banking, but it's still having like different velocities. So on this level, and I think this is important because you mentioned trading, and in order to trade, you need to have technology and you have to have people that are financial included. So India has a huge amount of financial excluded people, but like you said, sometimes the macro statistics doesn't show the reality. So could you tell us a bit about this research? And I'm sure you have more statistics about internet banking or even just banking in India. Let's touch that, because that's a kind of the holy grail. In order to create a society that is more financially excluded, you need to have the internet banking. You need to have that basics in place, so especially if you go to trade and commodities. So if you could give us a bit of an overview of your research and as well different colleagues of yours.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll answer your question in two parts. Firstly, about the research. So we started this research in 2006, and at that time, internet banking or online banking was a relatively new phenomenon. So it had been around for about, let's say, 5 or 6 years in India, available as it was available to the retail market. And there were naturally lots of apprehensions about various aspects. So how do you go about doing it? How do you approach it? And then computers were not really as ubiquitous then as they are now. So we decided just to do a test of what it is that causes concern for people. So why does a person prefer to go to the bank in the traditional sense as opposed to doing his or her banking online? So we carried out this study, and then we divided the population into two parts: those who actually take up banking and online, and those who do not go for online banking. And then we segregated these two groups, and then we tested them on various parameters like their concerns. So one of the major concerns was that of the safety of their money, and that was actually very well founded. But in the years since, we find that the Reserve Bank of India has come up with large number of mechanisms that make these transactions highly secure. So I had recently a professor visiting me from the US, and he said that I'm afraid to use my credit card in India because I'm not sure how safe it is to use a card. And then I actually told him, and then he agreed with this, that right as of now, we actually have two extra layers of security in India. So if which makes it more secure than most global transactions. So the security concern that we came up with during that research has largely been addressed since. And coming to the second part of your question, that is about the financial literacy. Yes, financial literacy has been a challenge. There are many things which actually give rise to this challenge. First, of course, is lack of literacy. So many people who are not literate, but also many people who do not have access to physical banks. And that also, in the past 5 years or so, has been dealt with in a big way. So the government of India came up with a particular scheme called the Jan Dhan account scheme. And in this Jan Dhan account scheme, they brought so many unbanked people into the banking under the banking umbrella just by opening accounts for them and telling them that these are what you call no frills accounts. So they have none of the fancy things associated with them. But what you can do is you can keep your money in that account. You do not need to keep a minimum deposit, and you can make a certain number of withdrawals. Now let me put it on record that this scheme has worked really very well, particularly in this time right now where we are locked down and we need to put some money in the form of social security into the pockets of poor people. The presence of these accounts, which we call Jan Dhan accounts, this makes it possible for the government to straight away transfer money into the accounts of these people who can then go ahead and withdraw it. And then there's this very interesting scheme called it translates into doorstep banking. So I'll not go into the details, but what it allows a bank to do is that that India is very, very vast. It has a huge population. There are more than 600,000 villages. So we don't have bank branches in all of those villages. So what the government has done is it worked on two fronts here. One is that the post office system in India actually has a much larger reach than the banking system. So there are more post offices than bank branches. So it allowed post offices to function as full-fledged banks. And it's possible to find a post office in very remote areas. But the second thing it did was it came up with a model called the banking correspondent model. So a bank appoints a person in a village as its correspondent, and this person, he has something which is called a micro ATM. So a micro ATM is very similar to your card reader, your credit card reader. And what that micro ATM does is that this gentleman who is the banking correspondent will travel to the doorstep of the person who has shown an interest in making either a deposit or a withdrawal or a transfer. And we have, these are the primary requirements of people for banking. Either you need to make a deposit, or you need to make a withdrawal, or maybe you need to transfer money safely from where you're working to where your family resides, or anyone else who needs it. So this micro ATM doesn't need a lot of information. It is equipped with a fingerprint reader, and the person who needs to make the banking transaction will have to come up with some sort of an identification. Typically, it is what we call the Aadhaar card, which is the unique identification card, which has been issued across the population in India, and the biometrics are associated with the Aadhaar card. So the banking correspondent travels to the doorstep of the person who's working or who needs to make a financial transaction. The person will establish his identity by swiping his finger and presenting his ID card. And based on that, this person can actually make a withdrawal or a deposit or a transfer. Now, the problem here, which existed in the past, was that a person who's, let's say, is a daily wage earner, when he needs to travel to the bank, he would probably have to sacrifice one day of wages or at least half a day of wage, because he would have to take off from work and then travel to the bank. And that's a huge sacrifice. Now with doorstep banking, what happens is that he doesn't need to travel to the bank, so he doesn't lose out on a day of labor or half a day of labor. The banking correspondent comes to this person, and in a safe and secure manner, the cash withdrawal or deposit, etc., is possible. So this is actually a huge revolution if you think of it, and it's actually happening on the in the villages, at the ground level, at the grassroots level. So I would hail this as one of the important developments that has happened, and particularly since I wrote that paper, a lot of things have changed.
Yeah, this is quite interesting, and I would like to just make a kind of a parallel between India innovation and as well China innovation. China was as well an underdeveloped economy just 10 years ago, and it became right now the biggest fintech powerhouse in the world. But most of the innovation in China has been centralized and driven by the central government and the system of governance, whereas in India it's much more kind of a system of innovation. So can you tell us about this and as well how that is different and as well, because like India is the second biggest economy in the world, and I want to touch probably after this question this. But in terms of that, the innovation and all this kind of technology, financial, regulatory parts that are very different from, for instance, the parallel with the Chinese economy and what has been happening there. So how do you see this, and as well from an academic and as well from a research perspective?
Yes, I'll start from the academic perspective because I deal with students in and day out. And I also sit in the entrepreneurship cell. So we tend to promote ideas of students. We get some grants and some other facilities from the government to pass on to students who are willing to come up with startups. And in some of these screening meetings, really, those meetings turned out to be eye openers for us, because we initially thought that we will screen students' ideas and we will finance those students whose ideas tend to be good. And we had a little bit of space to offer them. So we thought that we would help them out in two ways. We would provide them some space to start their startup, and we would provide them with some money so that they could work on the startup. So this is how we started out in the entrepreneurship cell some years back. Now we got a large number of business ideas, and the students came forward to present those. And then we realized that we actually were looking at it completely in the wrong way. Because the student ideas were all brilliant, it was difficult to screen them. All of them were really good. And interestingly, they did not need our money. There were any number of people who were willing to finance them. And most of them did not even need our space. What they really needed was some sort of hand-holding support in terms of how to take the product to market, how to scale up, how to brand, how to make it into a saleable product, how to protect their intellectual property. These were the things that our technical graduates were not very good at. But the idea was technologically wonderful. It was completely viable. And since then, many of them have actually gone and made those into working prototypes. So when it comes to innovation, again, all governments, I think, across the world are promoting this. But in India also, it has been promoted largely through initiatives which are being taken up not just in terms from the government side, but also by private people, like angel investors or people who provide funding. They are being funded by companies under the corporate social responsibility initiatives, and lots is happening. And also, I would like to mention here that the economy is poised for growth, because I was about 2 years back, I was invited by the largest passenger car manufacturer in India. I was invited to one of their plants, and they had invited a team of people like me, and they got together some of their biggest, the senior most people. And the senior people were talking about how they saw the automobile industry over the next few years. And the Automobile Industry Association in India, it had some figures. In 2018, it said that by 2030, which is, let's say, 12 years down the line, we see 2.5 times as many cars being sold. So this was 2 years back. And of course, since then, we have gone into something of a recession. But if I think of it from the viewpoint of economics, these people who are coming up with these projections are aware of the fact that recession is part of the trend. And then the larger trend tends to continue regardless of the recession. So they would have foreseen that. So the figure of 2.5 times the number of passenger cars, for example, being sold would still stand. What they would probably not have accounted for is something like this pandemic. So even if we assume that the car sales will grow not by 2.5 times, but they would double. There's a huge amount of growth that is poised to happen. So if we talk about India growing in terms of its economic output, in terms of its manufacturing prowess, then even without looking at any other country or without looking to take their share of manufacturing, there's enough to do within India itself. And they are poised to do it. So they are setting up the plants, they're setting up the systems where they can scale up to do this. In terms of fintech, there have been large number of innovations, as can be evidenced by the growth in the stock markets, the growth in the derivatives markets, and also if you look at most of the large banks, global banks, which are also operating in India, I go there and I find that they're actually not doing any banking at all. So they are providing solutions in this same area of financial technology, and those solutions are being engineered sitting right here. So they are leveraging again the kind of intellectual capital which is available, and they are taking that intellectual capital. The output of that is being used for producing um, technologically enhanced products in the domain of finance.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing and very important. So coming back right now to the numbers and to the Indian economy, and especially we are in a very, very critical here because of COVID-19, which India doesn't seem to be so affected compared to the rest of the world, bearing in mind actually all the infrastructure is here. I think India is congratulations compared with countries that are much more developed. But one of the questions I have is, so from a numbers perspective, and you've been doing a lot of research on this, so how do you see the economical, the financial circumstances of India, but as well with the context of COVID-19, because it's affecting the world economy to a level never seen probably in the last 100 years. If you see United how do you set in the context of the present numbers, but as well what is going to happen in the next couple of months? Because if you would be doing this interview just 2 months ago, probably the interview will be completely different. Now we're not in a conventional economical, social, and financial circumstances.
Yes, very true. We were, in any case, we had entered into a phase where the economy was beginning to go down, and that is natural, the economic cycle. So we were entering into a phase of recession, and in fact, that recession was quite well established, and we were looking to come out of it. But then this pandemic struck, and then we took a conscious decision that firstly, we would like to protect the safety aspect of our citizens. So we imposed quite a strict lockdown. That lockdown has been in effect for about almost 2 months and a week, let's say. And right now we are beginning to open up. But what happened in the interim was that because we have people who are stuck at one place and they want to go back home, so we have this aspect, this concept of people coming from one part of India and then going and becoming part of the workforce of another part of India. So typically the way it works, and it's really interesting, is that people who are from East and Central India tend to find work in the west side of India. So states like Maharashtra and Gujarat, or even Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, these are the states where they find employment. So now with this lockdown and people not having too much work to do, most of these people have moved back home. So the big challenge right now is that firstly and then economic activity has been at a standstill, almost at a total standstill for about 2 months now. So of course that was a conscious choice, and I see nothing wrong in that. But now is the time to open up again, and this is what our government has started to do. So now the big challenge is that with numbers falling, with the economy figures falling, and with the workforce away from where they need to be, again, can we build the confidence in the people that you can go back to where you were working and you can come up and you can start working again? Because it will take a lot of time to kickstart manufacturing again, to kickstart any kind of productive operation again. And then we have norms on social distancing as well. So you know that on the shop floor particularly, it's very difficult to maintain social distancing. And particularly in cases like assembly line manufacturing, you have a specified distance between two stations. So the economy will take a hit, but I think we've gone through worse situations probably. I would take it back to the great stock market collapse of the US of 1929, followed by the Great Depression, and then right after that by World War II. That was a really bad stage as well. And we would probably say that this is pretty bad as well. But the learning experience from what happened was that the US actually emerged as a superpower right after that. So it's just to say that it's not that we cannot do it. We are committed to doing it. And I'm really hopeful that we will do it. And I believe that, okay, I was talking about the fundamentals earlier. Looking at the fundamentals of the economy, there's still nothing that is wrong with the fundamentals. And this is why I can put this in an optimistic note that we are going to come back, we're going to bounce back. Once we have this thing under better control, probably we will start to go back to numbers that existed pre-COVID. And it's interesting because we now refer to it as pre-COVID and post-COVID. But post-COVID, probably in a year or so, we will be back to where we were in the pre-COVID times. This is not just an assumption or an optimistic kind of a prediction. This is based on the fact that still fundamentally we are where we were earlier. So that has not changed. Maybe the biggest challenge. So the biggest challenge really is to get the confidence back in the people that they can safely go back to the workplaces.
No, that's very positive. Actually, very good to hear that. So in coming back to your research, and I think that's very important for us as well. So one of the things, so you feel very positive towards then the macro numbers and the basics, and as well, like you said, this is an opportunity as well. So one of the things I would like to ask you, especially as an educational and as a teacher, is that most of the world economy right now is becoming digital. Okay, and we touch internet banking, we touch fintech. So how do you see that in India? Because India has been leading the CEOs, leading almost from the back to Google and so forth, and even MasterCard as well. So there's a lot of very success from your leadership and as well from coming back from Indian universities, most of them. So how do you see this kind of digital transformation acceleration that is right now being pushed by the COVID-19 effects, and as well the social distance and so forth, but as well in education? For instance, Cambridge recently said that they're going to have all classes online until 2021, which is quite impressive, bearing consideration that it's Cambridge, and as well the digital education and digital infrastructure and all these things. So how do you see that in the context of India, and as well in the context of all the areas of finance and education?
Yes, it's very interesting because as they say, it's a cliche that technology knows no borders. So we have also had the advantage of technology. And maybe about 15, 16 years ago, there was actually a very interesting research by Professor Jensen of Harvard. And what he realized, or what he put it in a paper, and what he said was that the cost of setting up a mobile tower is much less than the cost of putting cable connections to people's homes. But what it does is it allows people to access data even if they are sitting in a remote location. So I came up with that number of 600,000 plus villages in India. Now it would be very difficult to get them on a digital platform if they did not have internet connectivity. And it would be almost impossible if we were to take a cable connection to their home. However, through mobile towers, we are able to get internet to or mobile data to all parts of India. The best thing is that if you compare the two options, one is that a person accesses the internet on a desktop computer as compared to whether he access it on a mobile phone, on a mobile device like a smartphone. A personal computer requires power, a laptop needs to be recharged, and maybe we don't have uninterrupted power in all of those villages. But it's easy to keep a mobile phone recharged, and it stays recharged for long. You can simply set up a solar panel or just get access to some power. So what has happened over the years in India is that we've seen a huge amount of penetration of mobile phones, and the availability of mobile data is tremendous, and we have the cheapest mobile data in the world. So what that translates into is, and I think when you travel to India, you would have observed this, that everyone has a cell phone in their hands. They're all using huge amounts of data, and that data is available easily and freely. So now, in a situation like this, we need to leverage it. And we found that suddenly we had gone into a lockdown, and like you mentioned, Cambridge, we were required to switch from a physical mode to an online mode of teaching within the space of a week. And the interesting part is that we were able to reach students. Incidentally, we had sent our students home, so our students were at very remote locations. They were at hilly areas, mountainous areas, they were in desert areas. So once a student goes back home, you know that we have students coming from all over India. We were able to connect with all of them. And similarly, my children go to school. All these classes have gone to online mode. So the fact that we had these enabling technologies like internet, digital data, mobile data availability, and these smartphones or other devices has made it very easy for us to actually connect with all of them. And we are also actually conducting our examinations online. We are conducting evaluations online. We are conducting training programs online. So we have, it's been a great thing that we had this technology in place when we needed it most, and we've been able to leverage it to a very large extent. So again, I think many other people would bear me out, but this aspect has worked well for us, that the technology was in place before we needed it.
That's amazing, actually, because that is not the case with a lot of other countries. So, and I think coming from that to how do you see fintech? And you are a financial and analytics person. So I know that India is, especially in analytics and data, is probably one of the biggest countries in the world, because you have most of the big, if you look at data analytics, probably is all done in India, a huge part of the Western world at least. And as well, so how do you see that? And as well from a financial, but from a fintech perspective, and as well with the new developments of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things and other things, how you see this going into the space of financial management, financial analytics, and even data insights and big data?
Yes. So now our ability to handle it, to firstly produce data and then handle it and process it, has gone up significantly. And you of all people would know that there's a huge amount of automation which has come into it. So you mentioned artificial intelligence. Well, most of the trading which is happening on exchanges across the world is now being done by algorithms. And those algorithms are getting smarter and smarter. And also the way, not just in finance, but across the board, the way that the computer is able to learn, so machine learning and then deep learning, and then to respond to new learnings, that has gone up significantly. So just for example, now this computer that I'm sitting in front of is probably 300 times better than me at recognizing faces. So the same thing is happening in fintech as well, where you have smarter computers. They are able to handle particularly not just volumes of data, but time sensitive data, because you need time, you need to react. So it's an exciting new world. It's still unraveling, so it's difficult to predict what is going to happen, but whatever happens, it will be quite challenging for us.
So do you see that that I think that is one of the questions I always like to ask. So how do you see the future of education, and especially the future of finance in this context? Because I think this is probably the biggest challenge you're going to be facing, in parallel with all the chaos of the world, and as well the things coming out of the COVID-19. But how do you see that from a future of education, and as well even to train and prepare your students, and as well your academics and PhD researchers, which are the ones that are creating insights for the future?
Absolutely. So to take a cue from what the industry wants, in the placement office over the past 2 years, I've been getting huge amount of requirements, job descriptions that say we are looking for a BA role. So the people are looking for business analysts more and more. And the student community is very smart. They react they're proactive, so they act in advance. So now I find that when an opening comes up, the students are already prepared, because you have all of these programs which are floating around. They're very valuable programs being offered by some of the top institutions across the world. So students enroll, and again they use technology, so they take advantage of online courses. And I mentioned earlier that our school education system is really good, and one of the aspects it's good in is it equips them with the skills, the arithmetic skills. So they're good at number crunching, and this is if your brain is attuned to number crunching, then you would also take up well with analytics. So I'm finding maybe this is probably the case across the world, but analytics role is gaining prominence. And again, I'm seeing students who are already geared up and they're taking to it really well, like maybe a fish to water, maybe.
Very good. So I think we're passing 1 hour benchmark, which is more or less our basis. So I would like to. So one of the things that India is right now facing is this really incredible growth, as well positioning itself to become the second world economy, passing even the United States and only after China, according to most of the research worldwide, which is kind of a big benchmark to say less. And as well, India is the biggest population in the world, or is becoming even bigger. So how do you see these two challenges from a leadership perspective, from a financial perspective, and as well from an education perspective?
Right. So it is, like you said, it's a big target. But I think we need to take a big bite if we want to go anywhere. So it is a good target, but I did mention that we need to come more to tune with industry requirements. So from the education perspective, we need to ramp up the level of our education. We also, if we are to get to that level of economy, we will have to work harder in manufacturing. And there's this project called Make in India. And just today, our Prime Minister was speaking, and then he said, okay, make in India, but make for the world. So the target is that you produce goods in India. So you ramp up your manufacturing capabilities, and you don't just make them for domestic consumption, you make it for the world. So this is going forward. I think we have the right kind of leadership that has the vision to say this, to visualize this, and then to say this. And now on the e-commerce platforms, you have products which are labeled as made in India. So it's a matter of pride right now to look at products which are made in India. So probably that kind of an attitude will help us moving forward and reaching that kind of number.
So very positive. Well, I like to hear that. It's actually very important, given everything that is happening. So, as probably the last two questions I have is, so one of the things when you work with India and you collaborate with India is all this kind of social and cultural innuendos that are not easy to explain. So for someone that is listening to this, and I'm sure that in one way or the other, any company in the world at the moment is working with India. I would say from a usage of software, or from outsourcing, or from even engaging with business and in funding and so forth. So what would be your recommendations as a teacher? Let's say if you're looking for talent in India, because you have as well that hat between the relationship between universities and talent, which is the most important, because we will only have talent, we will only have an economy better if you manage to get these bridges. So what would be the message that you have for people around the world looking at you, and even other universities that want to partnership and collaborate with India?
I think we are extremely open. And like you said, that we are used to working in a multicultural environment because we have so many cultures in India. So our students are highly adaptable. You find that when they go out, they work with any company, they do well. Not only do they do well as employees, but they tend to be model citizens also. Maybe not so much in India, but when they go outside of India, you'll find that they contribute to society. So we are open to collaborating with everyone. In fact, we welcome it, and there is a mutual gain to be had.
Okay, so again, a very positive message. So I think from the research and the last question, so you have, especially the recent research you've been talking about, for instance, one of your last papers, at least in Google Scholar, is the role of financial risk attitude and financial behavior as mediators in financial satisfaction. So I would like to hear your opinion and probably wrap up with this as a financial because I think this positions as well and understanding this part of financial risk attitude and financial behavior in India and as well worldwide. I think this is quite interesting to listen and finish and wrap up with this.
Right. Yes, it is. It is interesting because human behavior across the world remains the same, and there is a very strong underpinning of human behavior when it comes to the movement of stock markets. So my primary area of work is the investment markets, but I found that it's very difficult to explain why investment markets behave in a particular way unless you link it with the way humans think. And, and that happens to be a common denominator across the world. So we found that there is this end goal of financial satisfaction, and we tried to see if what factors would basically influence this level of financial satisfaction. And we found that your financial appetite, so your financial risk attitude and other factors, there are a large number of factors. So for example, there is something very interesting called financial socialization. Financial socialization basically means who you discuss financial matters with. So if you're someone like me who sits mostly with academicians and talks to them in terms of investments, you would probably end up with a very highly conservative attitude. So teachers don't really tend to take high risks. So what they'll do is they'll put all their investments in very safe havens. But if you are talking to people who are trading on the trading floor or maybe doing active trading, so you're socializing with those people, in that case, your financial appetite would be different, and then your investments would end up being different. So this is what these papers actually talk about. So we have aspects like socialization behavior, your risk attitude, your mental accounting, and many things of that aspect.
Very good. Well, Professor Tanuj, it's been a pleasure. There's, of course, we could talk for hours more, but I'm sure there will be more opportunities. I appreciate. We're going to put the links to the university and your research as well during the interview, both in YouTube and different channels. And I appreciate it. I don't know if you want to just finalize with some notes about how to find your university, how to find some of your research, and as well how to get in contact with you. I think it's always important to keep the doors open.
Thank you so much, Dinis. It's been a pleasure being here, and we'll keep on interacting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I appreciate. Okay, have a great day and keep safe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.